सारे माननीय संसद गणों को मेरा प्रणाम. A very good morning to all the honorable members of parliament and all the colleagues who are joining us today morning for this sensitization session. Seema ji, I take it that it will be about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then we could go into question answers. For everyone's benefit, I have prepared a presentation to cover some of the important aspects, and then we can get into more details during discussion phase. Next, please. The slide shows the G20 logo, which is a very uniquely designed logo through people's participation. Just to explain a little bit, because it's important since it is used in during our presidency extensively, both in India and abroad, in our national tricolors. The Earth reflects our pro-planet approach. The lotus reflects the growth amid challenges. In addition to India, it is also saying Bharat in Devanagari script. Our theme, in fact, I would call it the motto, is Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, the ancient Indian adage from the Maha Upanishad, and to reinforce our approach for oneness, one earth, one family, one future. And this theme represents the pro-planet approach, where Earth cannot be dissociated from the people, from the environment, and we look at one health approach amid a lot of challenges, and work towards inclusive and sustainable growth. Next, please. So, our G20 presidency context, we have embarked on our presidency from the 1st of December. We will be hosting the 18th G20 summit in 2023. This, in the history of independent India, would be the most high-profile multilateral event ever. We have not had P5 leaders and the 20 leading economies of India together. In India together. The summit will be held in the 10th year of the government and the 75th year of our independence. It also is at Amrit Kal, the 25-year period which has begun after India at 75. We are currently the UNSC president until the end of December. We are also the Shanghai Cooperation Chair from September 22 to September 23. So this context is very important, setting India's G20 presidency, setting the backdrop for our G20 presidency. What is our objective in G20 presidency is to shape the setting of the agenda, host an impeccable and uniquely Indian G20, and contribute to the global narrative on responding to a number of challenges that face us today. Next, please. The G20 structure comprises of, I would say G20 brings together almost the entire country in a series and a very large number of engagements. It has the finance track, which is led by the finance ministers, the Sherpa track, headed by the G20 Sherpa, who also negotiates the leaders' declaration, and ministerial meetings, including foreign ministers and line ministers meeting. There are, in addition to the government engagement, which is what we are showing with a dotted line, there are 11 engagement groups, which are associations or groups between the private sector, between civil society, between women, youth, and academia. So you would see that under the G20 structure, the whole of the country is very deeply engaged in all the meetings with G20 members, with the leading countries of the world. An estimated 200 meetings will be held under the G20 itself, including the Leaders Summit, which would be in September next year, ministerial meetings, finance track meetings, Sherpa track meetings, engagement group meetings, as well as seminars and workshops. Next, please. A very quick look on the process under the Sherpa track. All the working groups, there are 13 working groups which are listed on the screen. They are all led by different line ministries: anti-corruption, agriculture, culture, development, digital economy, disaster risk reduction and resilience, which we have started during our presidency, employment, environment, education, energy transitions, health, trade and investment, and tourism. So you would see that the entire socio-economic spectrum of G20 countries engage closely with each other during the G20 presidency. Next, please. In the finance track, we have 8 work streams. They are co-chaired by the presidency and 2 other countries, which is the permanent co-chairs. They deliberate on global macroeconomic issues, growth strategies, mobilizing sustainable finance, facilitating financial inclusion, global health finance for the pandemic, addressing tax evasion, and stable and resilient global economic system. Next, please. Now, it's important to appreciate the scale of the G20 beyond the G20 members. There are, in fact, India's would be the largest ever G20 participation, with 9 guest countries, which have been selected based on a number of criteria where they are very close to us and contribute to the G20 narrative, which are Bangladesh, Egypt, Mauritius, Netherlands, Nigeria, Oman, Singapore, Spain, and UAE. A number of international organizations, which is very important, do come in the G20 discussions, which is and with them they bring a number of their member countries also. So it is not that G20 is limited only to the G20 members or the guest countries, but through the international organizations and through other regular interactions with the countries not in G20, even their narrative is brought into the discussions. Other than that, there are countries which head regional organizations, which is the African Union chair. In February, we expect to have a new African Union chair after Senegal. AUDA NEPAD is led by Rwanda, and ASEAN chair during 2023 will be Indonesia itself, which is a G20 member. We have taken particular care to invite India-based international organizations, the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Risk Resilient Infrastructure. So with 43 heads of delegations, this would be the largest ever participation in G20. Next, please. The scale of the G20, we have looked at the presidency year, pre-summit, 200 meetings, ownership by ministries, associated preparations, content generation, and outcomes will be critical. We have already looked at, the G20 summit itself would be, of an unprecedented scale, if I may. Nearly 43 delegations, 10,000 foreign attendees can be expected, nearly 30 special aircraft with hotels, vehicles, and security. Next, please. In terms of preparedness, roles and responsibilities of summit and non-summit, the main substantive responsibilities, logo and theme have been finalized and launched. Priorities are evolving. There are a number of substantive conversations going on which have been seeded in the past G20 discussions so far, based on which outcomes and deliverables will be finalized. I will come later into the some of the priorities and outcomes and deliverables as we are looking at it now. In terms of logistics, we are looking at more than 50 cities across the country with media, branding and a website which was launched on 8th of November and is now the presidency website. It's also notable that this website will be a repository of all information on G20. We are working very closely with all G20 countries to ensure that that we can put entire documentation from the very inception of G20 in the website. Culture, tourism and security will be the other important aspects. Next, please. In terms of G20 summit, the dates have been finalized. It will be held in New Delhi on 9th and 10th of September. The dates were carefully chosen, keeping the international calendar, including the UN sessions in mind. Security aspects, logo has been launched, the theme has been finalized, and the website has also been launched. Next, please. An important comparison between G20 and other international organizations. G20, while it is extremely influential and some of its strength comes because of a rather informal, if I may use it, put it that way, nature of deliberations. G20 is a group. It does not have a permanent secretariat when compared with a number of international organizations which are UN, WTO, WHO or international financial institutions, which are formal intergovernmental organizations with a permanent secretariat. The membership of G20 are the leading economies of the world, plus the EU. Usually in other international organizations, we have almost all countries as members or as eligible for membership. All decisions in G20 are taken only by consensus. So this is important. Therefore, it is important to ensure that countries on all sides of the, with all shades of opinion and different sides of the spectrum, from the G7 to Russia, China, from advanced economies to developing countries, all come on the same page, because only then real progress is possible. While in some of the other international organizations, decisions are based on majority. The important aspect of G20 is it provides policy guidance. Though not legally binding, its guidance is taken by all international organizations. To give a couple of examples, when G20 gave a cue for handling the COVID epidemic, in fact, that is the last row. G20 was, when the UN was suspended virtually after the COVID pandemic struck, decisions were not being taken, meetings were not being held. The G20 stepped up and responded to the COVID pandemic through the COVAX as well as the Act A scheme. And when it came to economy, it launched the debt service suspension initiative, or DSSI, through the IMF. So the not having a permanent secretariat and working through discussions and deliberations to set a narrative and provide policy guidance is a strength of G20, which is what all its members have endorsed. It does not have very set rules of procedures. It can take up any issue of global concern, and that's where, while the international organizations work according to a procedure and a mandate, this is what has really made G20 a very strong and influential body in the international discourse today. Next, please. I'll quickly run through some of the important priorities that India has identified. First and foremost, we have seen that the entire digital and technological transformation that has been brought about in India is something that we can share with the world. Our digital public infrastructure, our cooperative framework, our consent-based architecture, and our widespread financial inclusion, including for the most vulnerable, has really been an important contribution that has brought about a change and a transformation in the Indian economy. A digital health initiative, because if we have to work towards universal health coverage, then the only way to do it is digital health. Tech-enabled education, which is another area where we have harnessed the power of the digital tools. Next, please. Among this, an important deliverable will be to see if public digital infrastructure or public digital platforms can be presented and can be accepted as a common framework of standards, protocols, scalability, security, and open source architecture for the world to benefit from. Today, 133 countries of the world do not have financial inclusion. More than 50 countries do not have digital identities. And this is where the strength of India can be used for the benefit of the vulnerable and economies and the nearly 1.7 billion people who are still financially excluded. In this, the deliverable could be a guiding framework for public digital infrastructure based on identity, connectivity, public service delivery, and a payment system. Next, please. Similarly, we could work towards a digital health solution to facilitate universal health coverage and work towards a global initiative on an endorsement of a framework for digital health, which will really provide for health data interoperability, neutral data sharing, telemedicine, consent and security for data usage, and collate scientific expertise. Tech-enabled education, in particular, using the digital transformation to achieve SDGs, to use digital tools, for example, the scheme of aspirational districts, which has been so successful and helped the district progress significantly in achieving SDGs and using G20 to launch an initiative on data for development. Next, please. The other important large priority would be lifestyle for environment, the whole area of green development and lifestyle for environment, where it's important to appreciate that we cannot have a successful green transition without socio-economic development, and we cannot have socio-economic development without adequate and speedy green transition. So the idea here is green and development go hand in hand. One cannot be achieved while the other is lagging. Green transition and SDGs are two sides of the same coin. So this is the broad priority under which we will promote a sustainable consumption, responsible production, as well as climate finance, accelerating SDGs, and just energy transitions. Next, please. Among these specific priorities, we are looking at timely, fair, and adequate climate finance. In fact, the US $100 billion goal for climate finance from developed to developing countries is expected to be achieved during G20 presidency of India next year. We will also have deliberations on a new quantified collective goal post 2025 for climate finance. Accelerating progress on SDGs will be the other important pillar. 2030 agenda, which was launched in 2015, its halfway mark will be in 2023 and would be a time to thoroughly review and come up with an updated action plan for accelerating progress on SDGs. Next, please. Lifestyle for environment was the whole movement launched by Honorable Prime Minister with the UN Secretary General, and our idea would be to launch a G20 high-level principles on life to nudge individual and community behavioral change and promote sustainable lifestyles. In fact, with the efforts of the Indian delegation, lifestyle for the first time was brought in the Bali Declaration in November this year. Next, please. Circular economy and energy transition, in which just one thing I would like to highlight, which is the importance of energy transition. If we have to achieve a global net zero, and including our own ambition for net zero, it's important that we tackle hard to abate sectors like cement, steel, fertilizers, refineries through non-fossil fuel options which can take massive power loads, and here green hydrogen in particular plays a very important role, and we will make an effort to develop an international framework for scaled up development and international trading of green hydrogen. Next, please. In terms of accelerated, inclusive and resilient growth, this is going to be a key priority because debt crisis is affecting more than 70 countries in the world today, and we will have to address it through global discussions on debt, boosting trade. We have seen that growth does not happen until growth and international trade go in many ways hand in hand. We also need to work towards a global skill mapping where capabilities and requirements can be matched. In this rubric, we would also work towards a global food security initiative as well as fighting against economic crimes. Next, please. Trade for growth, I have already covered. Blue economy would be very important. When we are talking about inclusive and resilient growth. Next, please. And the global food security initiative, where in the times of current food and energy insecurity, this acquires special importance with inclusive food systems. 2023 will be the year of the millet, and focus on nutrition linked to life and sustainable agriculture, connecting farmers to the marketplace and including the small and marginal farmers will be a very high priority for India. Next, please. The fourth pillar is really on multilateralism and food, fuel and fertilizer, in which counterterrorism, no WMDs, implementation of sanctions in a humanitarian manner, mobility of talent and researchers, and development cooperation principles would be other important priorities. Next, please. I have covered this. Particularly, I would like to highlight here making institutions more effective for delivering on climate and development agenda, enhancing mandate of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, and the reform of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism would be very important for India. Next, please. Lastly, our key pillar will be women-led development. We are seeing increasingly we are moving from women empowerment to women-led development, bringing women to the core of development in terms of access, agency and capacity. Bringing women in education, workforce and leadership would be a very important priority for India. Next, please. I have covered this already. Particularly, we will look towards special events focusing on women during our presidency. Next, please. A number of engagement groups will play a very critical role during our presidency, from Business 20, Civil 20. I have listed some of the thinking. The priorities are for them to decide, but we will try to align as much as possible with the private sector, with the civil society, as well as the other engagement groups. In particular, I'd like to mention Parliament 20, where honorable members of Parliament are also deeply involved, and Honorable Speaker has attended all the Parliament 20 summits. In this, our entire ancient democratic roots with India as the mother of democracy will be sought to be highlighted. Next, please. Some of the challenges that we see in G20, positions of G20 members are issue-based, and they vary from from supportive to sometimes they would try to bring in outcomes aligned with their own individual or specific interests. It is natural that this happens, but it's the job of the G20 and the presidency to try and come to a common minimum understanding to deliver results on a number of topics of international concern. Climate action, climate justice. This is just a list of subjects in which we see varying positions of G20 members. Debt treatment, we have certain countries which are very much in favor of a common framework. We have to also deal with G20 countries which do not want to be part of the common framework. Similarly, climate justice and in trade, special and differential treatment are some of the areas where we need to bring greater consensus. Energy transitions will be very critical, where we need to talk about finance and technology to support climate change targets as well as energy transition. Next, please. A quick slide on what India could do in the Bali Declaration for everyone's benefit. Inclusive paragraph could be brought in, reflecting the wide spectrum of positions on Ukraine. Reference to today's era must not be a war was clearly brought in, which was a very strong message coming out of G20. And there were a number of important substantive references which reflected India's interest from sustainable development and lifestyles, climate finance, additional finance by multilateral development banks, finance and technology as critical enablers, One Health, nutritious food, marginal farmers, regional energy connectivity, global digital health initiative, and debt treatment to Chad, Zambia, Ethiopia, inclusive and digital economy, as well as the new support for 2 new areas of effort on startups as well as disaster risk resilience. Next, please. In the end, I would conclude by saying what are we trying to achieve in G20? 3 key things. We are sharing the Indian story, sharing our story with the rest of the world, and so that everyone can benefit from the areas in which we have achieved success. Inclusive growth, caring for all, leaving no one behind, and taking collective action. Prime Minister has spoken about India's G20 presidency being ambitious and outcome-oriented, and this is what our approach will be. So a whole-of-nation approach with all stakeholders, including honorable parliamentarians, civil society, academia, as well as government, will ensure G20 success. Next, please. Thank you. Thank you. We are open to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shri Abhay Thakurji. Now the floor is open for questions. If honorable members wants to ask any question, please, we can start with sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thakur. I'm Sujit Kumar, member of Rajya Sabha. Thank you. So 2 queries, 2 quick questions. One is regarding the guest countries. So you did mention that there are 9 guest countries to be invited to this 23 summit. So who decides? Is it the presidency that decides the guest countries that are to be invited? And what is the status? Do they have an observer status, or do they take part in all the deliberations? That's number 1. Second is consensus, of course, is the pillar of all the G20 activities and deliberations. Now, I did not find mention of terrorism. As a nation, we are victim of terrorism emanating from both state and non-state actors from across the border. So why has terrorism not found a prominent place in the G20 agenda when we know that we are victim of terrorism from Pakistan? So that should have been there, in my view.
So thank you, sir. Guest countries.
ठीक है तो सर आप पूछिए.
सर, जैसे मैंने आज ही पढ़ा है कि अमेरिका के CIA ने हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर को इंडोर्स किया है कि किस तरह से उन्होंने जो रशिया को थोड़ा नॉर्मल किया है इस बात के ऊपर कि न्यूक्लियर जो है वो हथियारों का प्रयोग ना हो. तो इस तरह से कि किस तरह से भारत जो है शुरू से ही ये जो न्यूक्लियर पावर है इसको लेकर कंस्ट्रक्टिव कामों के लिए ही शांतिपूर्ण ढंग से उसके उपयोग के हक में रहा है। तो इसको हम G20 के जो एजेंडा है उसके अंदर हम किस तरह से उसको हम शामिल करेंगे। और दूसरे कई मुद्दे और बायोडाइवर्सिटी का जो है मुद्दा चल रहा है, एनर्जी क्राइसिस का जो मुद्दा है वो चल रहा है। हालांकि भारत ने जो भी ये COP27 हुई थी या उससे पहले जो हुआ था बड़ा स्पष्ट स्टैंड लेकर ये कहा है कि हम जो हमारा लक्ष्य है पेरिस डिक्लेरेशन का उसको हम हासिल जरूर करेंगे, लेकिन जो हमारे देश की जो प्राथमिकताएं हैं जब तक हम उनको पूरा न कर लें तो ये जो सिनेरियो बनेगा उसके अंदर हम किस तरह से सारी चीजों को डील करेंगे। क्योंकि हमारे भी कुछ दोस्त हैं पाकिस्तान और चाइना जैसे, जिनकी हमेशा कोशिश रहेगी इसमें। और अभी हम देख भी रहे हैं कि जो तवांग का विषय उठा है, तो एक ऐसे समय के अंदर कि इंडिया जो है इस G20 सम्मेलन से किस तरह से वर्ल्ड के लिए एक असेट्स बनकर उभरेगा, तो उसके अंदर भी कुछ ऐसी फोर्सेस अंदरूनी रूप से काम करेंगी कि जो हमारे जो गेम्स हैं G20 के उनको नकारने की उनकी कोशिश होगी। तो हाउ वी विल टैकल ऑल दोस इश्यूज, ये मैं थोड़ा कहना चाहता हूँ।
Many of the honorable members have joined online also, and if they also want to ask anything, please feel free to ask. And meanwhile, if the member sitting here wants to ask anything, so sir, you can reply.
Thank you, sirs. The first question on guest countries, sir. The guest countries are, yes, they are selected by the presidency. That is correct. But we also have to bear in mind that we need to keep what has been happening in the past in mind. It is important to ensure a degree of continuity. So, for example, some of the guest countries have been regular invitees. Singapore, UAE has been attending. Usually a neighbor of, because it's important to carry the neighborhood along with you. Some of the important strategic partners.
Is that why we have Bangladesh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Also to need to show, Africa currently has only one country, which is South Africa. So we would be having, Indian presidency would be having the maximum representation from Africa during its presidency, 6 countries. Because in addition to South Africa, we have Mauritius and Nigeria, plus the AU chair, NEPAD chair, and Egypt, of course, which is, so there are these 6 countries. And the UAE, Singapore, Netherlands have been regular invitees, so we have maintained that tradition. Secondly, sir, on terrorism, while I went through it quickly because of the paucity of time, in our priorities on multilateralism, we have a very, clear focus on counter-terrorism, sir. There have been some, to be fair, CT has not always figured in G20. In 2017 in Hamburg, there was a counter-terrorism declaration. 2018, there was no discussion on CT. 2019 in Osaka, there was an Osaka declaration on cyber terrorism. Again, 2020 and 21, 22 also there was no separate discussion. India is very determined to bring in CT in its G20 deliberations, along with the other point that was mentioned by Honorable Member of Parliament, where I had put on the slide no WMDs. Particularly on WMDs, I would like to, no weapons of mass destruction. When it comes to very detailed discussions on no first use, let me say this is a matter of security policy of countries. So it's not everyone will have the same policy. For example, India and China are the only two countries in the world which adhere to no first use. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But no other countries are currently adhering to it because of their various security postures. But having said that, there was a sentence in the Bali Declaration that the use or threat of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. This was brought in. This is a very strong reference. Whether or not you have a certain security posture against WMDs, the broad message that the use or threat of use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible was brought in the Bali Declaration, and it went down very well, globally. And we will try to continue to reinforce that line in our presidency. So, talking about, so that was a nuclear part. A very important concern when it comes to climate finance and the Paris Accord. The whole debate, sir, here is about we have to provide and ensure that we have the adequate policy space for our energy transition, for reaching our climate goals while protecting, while ensuring that the transition is smooth. No country is against climate change targets. The debate is about what is the extent of transition and policy space that is required for countries to reach. So our net zero is 2070. Number of countries have talked about net zero either around 2050 or 2060. So while being climate leader, while being very much a part of trying to be on the side of climate targets, we have also emphasized climate justice, policy space, where India brought in the last two declarations, again for the first time, finance and technology as critical enablers. Because without those critical enablers, we will not be able to achieve our climate targets. So what we have tried to achieve is a good balance, a good mix of action as well as policies place for achieving the transition in a smooth and just manner. So that's why just energy transition, which is why our focus on green hydrogen, because in our view it is the only fuel which can actually substitute fossil fuels in a big way. In addition, we have renewables, but they are not having the kind of base load. 80% of our power is consumed for industry, for hard to abate sectors. Only 20% is for household electricity, which can actually be then maybe used through renewable energy. But what do we do about industry, about chemicals, refineries, which is where we need a very reliable substitute for fossil fuels, and which is where some of the futuristic fuels like green hydrogen will play a very important role, which is where we are trying to create the policy space for it. So in all this discussion, I think the key aspect that India has emphasized is to ensure that there is adequate policy and transition space. Coming to your last question, sir, on how to manage the differences in G20, it's a very valid question. We have certain certain approaches which we will try to, some of it you could see it in action in the Bali Declaration. So two important things I will emphasize in this context. One, our individual relationships with G20 countries are very strong on both sides. So we are a partner country of the G7. We are also a member of the BRICS. We are a member of Quad. At the same time, we are also the president of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So we think that there is a certain trust. हम एक सेतु की तरह काम कर सकते हैं, जिसमें हम सबको जोड़ सकते हैं. That is one part, sir. The other, when it comes to a consensus-based declaration, if it's only one or two countries which are not, which are due to which the the consensus is not happening, then I think it's a situation which can be handled through persuasion. The difficulty is only when the issue is very divisive and it's about, 50-50 division. But if it's only one or two countries, then we can actually try and have a greater discussion. More often than not, the one or two countries which have been not part of the consensus eventually come around. But of course, we need to work hard. We need to ensure, because no one would at the end of the day not like to be a part of the consensus. So we need to work on it diplomatically to ensure that the common message of the G20 is understood by the entire G20 and by the world. So we have a degree of, despite so many differences, we could see Bali Declaration was eventually agreed, despite there not having been a single agreed document during the entire Indonesian presidency, because G20 and consensus is important for the world. The countries could work together, and despite one or two countries having differing positions, eventually everyone's the language and the narrative was found in which we could all come together. So I think there is space. It is not going to be a reason which should be allowed, on which India's G20 presidency will be affected. We will work very hard diplomatically, both bilaterally with the countries concerned and on the G20 table, to ensure that a consensus emerges. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. जी सर, जी सर,
आप पूछ रहे?
चलो उनको करने दो पहले।
नहीं, आप पूछ रहे थे सर, आप कर लीजिए, तो आप पूछो। मुझे तो केवल
मैं तो ये कहना चाहूंगा कि जो बाली डिक्लेरेशंस के जो भी आई थिंक 42 के लगभग पॉइंट्स, आई हैव रीड ऑल दोज पॉइंट्स, तो उन सब में ये कमिटमेंट सबने मानी है, जो डिक्लेरेशंस है उसकी, कि सस्टेनेबिलिटी ऑफ एवरीथिंग इन एवरी पैरा, कमिटमेंट इज टुवर्ड द सस्टेनेबिलिटी। तो उस दृष्टि से जो एसडीजीज हैं, हाफ पीरियड जो है वो यूएन डिक्लेरेशन का चला गया है, तो हमारे पास थोड़ा सा ही समय है। भारत ने उसके अंदर बहुत बेहतरीन भी किया है, लेकिन इस G20 की जो डेलिब्रेशंस है, उन सब में हम किस तरह से इसका बेनिफिट उठाते हुए अपने देश को और शक्तिशाली इसमें बना सकते हैं। और मुझे तो कहते हुए ये भी खुशी हो रही है कि अमेरिका के ही राष्ट्रपति जो बिडेन का ये बयान आया था कि अगर मोदी जी ने इसके ऊपर जोर न दिया होता कि इट इज नॉट ए टाइम ऑफ वॉर, इट इज ए टाइम ऑफ पीस, तो शायद ये जो है बाली डिक्लेरेशन ना हो पाती। तो एक अपॉर्चुनिटी भारत को मिला है, भारत की लीडरशिप को मिला है कि जिस सपने को हम वर्षों से देख रहे हैं उसको अचीव करने का एक, दिस इज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी। तो हमें इसका पूरा लाभ किस तरह से हम उठा सकते हैं।
I think, sir, now you can ask, and then at the end he will do.
पहले तो मैडम हमारे देश के यशस्वी प्रधानमंत्री जी को
एक सर हार्ड कॉपी जो आपने दिया है सारा, हाँ, और डेली जो है ना, कल परसों भी जो होगा,
हाँ, उसका पहले दे दे तो हमको भी थोड़ा,
वो थोड़ा सा हमारे भी रिसर्च करने के थोड़ा सा आप तो कर ही रहे हैं। हाँ,
नहीं, sir. ठीक है, sir. जी सर,
दे दो, मेरे को दे दो। थैंक यू।
सभी को दे दीजिएगा। हालांकि आपके इसमें
मैं आपसे रिक्वेस्ट कर रही हूँ मेंबर्स को कि हम लोग आपके पोर्टल पे इसको डलवा देंगे, और हार्ड कॉपी भी अगर आप जिनको भी चाहिए होगी वी विल सेंड इट। सो अभी तो सर के पास एक कॉपी थी, तो वी हैव गिवन। जी श्योर, ओके। Sir, now you can ask.
जी, मुझे ये पूछना था, पहले तो धन्यवाद कि हमने हमारे देश को उस थीम को कि वसुधैव कुटुंबकम को लिया है, तो पूरे देश को, विश्व को हमने कुटुंब माना है। मैं इसमें एक चीज और कहना चाहता कि इसमें हमने सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयः की थीम जरूर है उसमें, पर इसको भी कहीं ना कहीं लेना चाहिए कि हम जब सबके सुख की कामना करते हैं तो ये थीम भी इसमें जोड़नी चाहिए कि जब सुख की सबकी कामना है, तो उसी के अंतर्गत मैं कहना चाहूंगा जब हम हेल्थ पे सारा काम करेंगे तो ये जो WHO का जो रिपोर्ट्स आते हैं, आज के 30 साल पहले का वो समय वो क्या मानते थे, और नए रिसर्च के बाद अब सपोज डायबिटीज का, आज के 30 साल पहले फास्टिंग 140 मानी जाती थी, अब वो 90 ला दिए, तो लगभग 50% से लोग ज्यादा बीमार हो गए। तो एक मुझे लगता है बहुत बड़ा एक व्यापार इस तरह का इलाज का बढ़ गया। तो ये कहीं ना कहीं देखना चाहिए कि मतलब कोई किसी व्यक्ति को लाभ देने के लिए या किसी एक वर्ग को लाभ देने के लिए क्या इस तरह की रिपोर्ट आकर के सारे विश्व को सारा बीमार कर दिया जाएगा। जब हम सबके सुख की कामना करते हैं तो ये सबको दुख में कर दिया, भय का वातावरण पैदा हो रहा है हेल्थ के अंतर्गत, जबकि सभी हेल्थ कॉन्शियस है, तो हेल्थ के अंदर एक बहुत बड़ी दिक्कत हो रही है। तो ये एक टेररिज्म तो अपनी जगह है, और हम खुद भी, मैं खुद जिले से आता हूँ, वहाँ नक्सल प्रभावित जिला है, तो कितना हम लगातार इससे परेशान होते हैं। तो जब आज हमको, जब हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी कहते हैं कि हम युद्ध के लिए बुद्ध का देश है, तो एक बहुत अच्छा अवसर मिला है हमको अपनी सारी बात कहने का। तो जब बुद्ध का देश है तो शांति हम सब चाहते हैं, पर शांति के साथ शक्ति भी चाहिए, तो शक्ति होगी तो ही शांति होगी। तो सारे देश डेवलप तो करेंगे, पर जैसे हर एक के अपने हथियार होते हैं, पर हथियार का उपयोग कब करना, तो एक अच्छी बात है कि बाली डिक्लेरेशन में जो आपने बात कही, शक्ति सबके पास रहे पर विनाश करने का ना रहे। एक भारत एक अच्छा संदेश देने की स्थिति में हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी के अध्यक्षता में। और दूसरा मैं जानना चाह रहा था सर कि ये जो हमने स्थान का चयन किया है, तो क्या स्थान चयन हो गया कि 56 का कौन कौन से प्लेसेस होंगे, तो जानकारी यदि आएगी। अभी तो शायद चयनित नहीं हुआ होगा, पर कहीं ना कहीं हर एक स्टेट ने अपना वर्क करना प्रारंभ कर दिया है, तो स्थानों की जानकारी है। दूसरा पर्यावरण के संबंध में हम जितना शायद पर्यावरण का नुकसान नहीं करते, जितनी सुरक्षा हम करते हैं, क्योंकि हमारी संस्कृति में पर्यावरण के संरक्षण करना, ठीक है, हमने कुछ विकास के रास्ते में आकर कुछ पर्यावरण का नुकसान किया, पर अन्य देश जो पर्यावरण का जितना ज्यादा नुकसान किया वो हम ही को ज्यादा ज्ञान देते हैं और हम ही से कहते हैं कि आप ये सब चीजें अपनाइए, पर वो टेक्नोलॉजी भी नहीं देते हैं। यदि उनके पास टेक्नोलॉजी तो हमें दें, या वो सबसे ज्यादा नुकसान कर रहे हैं तो वो हमें क्रेडिट दें, ताकि हम यदि कोई कार्बन क्रेडिट यदि हम कर रहे हैं तो हमें कार्बन क्रेडिट का पैसा हमारे देश के लोगों को मिलना चाहिए। कहीं ना कहीं इस विषय में क्या स्थिति होगी, क्योंकि सबसे ज्यादा जो अपने आप को विकसित देश कहते हैं, सबसे ज्यादा पर्यावरण का नुकसान उन्होंने किया है, और हम जो अविकसित देश हैं, विकासशील की गिनती में है, तो हम उतना नुकसान नहीं कर रहे हैं पर्यावरण का, और हम कहीं ना कहीं संरक्षण कर रहे हैं। तो ये भी बात आनी चाहिए कि वो देश जो ज्यादा नुकसान वो हमें क्रेडिट करें, हम उसका हमको क्रेडिट करें, चाहे वो जिस रूप में भी पर्यावरण का क्रेडिट हमें दें, कार्बन क्रेडिट हमें दें, और उसका पैसा हमें दें, ताकि हमारे देश के लोग और ज्यादा उसका पर्यावरण के संरक्षण में आगे बढ़ सके। तो इस तरह से हमारे पास फॉरेस्ट भी बहुत है, किसान भी बहुत है, तो किसान की भी कहीं ना कहीं आमदनी, यदि कार्बन क्रेडिट आता है तो किसान को भी एक बहुत बड़ा लाभ इससे मिलेगा, तो हमारे एग्रीकल्चर को भी लाभ मिलेगा। विषय तो बहुत सारे हैं, पर मैंने केवल 2-3 विषयों की ओर अपनी चिंता व्यक्त की है कि जब हमें अवसर मिला है तो दमदारी के साथ निश्चित रूप से हम अपनी बात तो रखेंगे, पर हमारा देश कहीं ना कहीं विश्व का इसमें मार्गदर्शन करेगा। अमृत काल तो है ही, तो सही में सारे देशों को अमृत मिलेगा ही। मैं केवल ये मेरे 2-3 चीजें थी। साइबर क्राइम भी इस समय पर, जब हम डिजिटल इंडिया की बात करें, डिजिटल सारे विश्व को चाहते हैं, तो ये डिजिटल में साइबर क्राइम भी एक बहुत बड़ा मामला आ गया है। तो इसका भी कहीं ना कहीं टेक्निक ऐसी है कि इसको क्राइम को तत्काल कैसे पकड़ें और कैसे करें, कैसे रोक सकें, क्योंकि आज की तारीख में तो सबसे ज्यादा लोगों के बैंक बैलेंस सब साफ हो रहे हैं, खाते साफ हो रहे हैं, और हम कुछ नहीं कर पा रहे हैं उनका। तो एक बहुत बड़ा क्राइम भी आ रहा है। अभी हमने बीच में पढ़ा था कि शायद एक दिन उन्होंने रेलवे को हैक कर दिया था, ऐसा सब कर दिया, तो पता नहीं कितना हमारा ट्रांजैक्शन चला जाएगा। तो ये टेक्नोलॉजी पर भी हो और इस क्राइम के ऊपर भी कहीं ना कहीं चिंता हो। धन्यवाद।
Thank you. So it was a really very insightful presentation you have given. My just suggestion is like you have told that 9 guest countries are there and 43 head of the different countries will participate in the September. I think it is better in case if you just started with the G7 countries, how it started,
and what were those G7 countries, and after that 13 countries they just included into it, and after that it is G20, and what are those countries? I think not much of the member of parliaments will be aware that which are those 20 countries. And also I just want to ask, like, if there is inclusion of renewables, how we can join hand in hand with the neighboring countries for the renewables particularly, and what is our focus towards COP26 motto given by Honorable Prime Minister, one sun, one world, one grid. Because 75% of the GDP of the world is, because of these G20 countries, and also 85% of the population is almost all, not exactly all, but most of the countries will be included, I think, in G20. So my focus is, like, in case if you just start with the countries, and also what is the, like, for one sun, one world, one grid, what we are doing for that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Honorable, I'll very quickly respond to the points. First of all, thank you so much for these very valuable suggestions. We will take them on board. On SDGs, Honorable MP had asked about what we are going to do. So 2 key points: enhancing the mandate of multilateral development banks. That is going to be very important. There has been some seeds of this have been sown during the Indonesian presidency. We were party to that. So trying to see that, bridge the finance gap. That is the key to achieving both climate goals and SDGs. So that is something that we are going to focus on. There will also be, next year would also be a year of the quota reform of IMF. So that will be also an important, factor which will feed into this. Broadly, yes, we are halfway in the SDG period. The key thing that we have brought in is critical enablers, which is enhancing the mandate, really providing finance through blended instruments, through first loss guarantees, through de-risking the current financing schemes. For example, World Bank provides sometimes billions of dollars of financing for individual projects. Can we tweak such financing to simply de-risking finance available from other sources, so that we can actually provide the first loss guarantee and the blended finance, which will increase the finance, by 10x, 50x, which is available for green development. So that is the way to actually leverage your finance from individual projects to simply only for de-risking and blending the finance. That is where
I think we are having Gati Shakti, that is the collective, and in case if we just get some for this Gati Shakti from the World Bank.
Yes.
In Gati Shakti, I think so many departments they just included.
Yes, but these are individual projects. So we need to really look at the same amount being used for a large number of projects through either private finance or other sources of finance, so that the de-risking, which is the real challenge in financing, can be looked after by some of the international financial institutions, and the rest of it, money is available in the market, but it is not going because of its the risk factor that is involved. So that is one. Sir, your points about WHO and carbon credits is very well taken. This is something, we have tried to bring in terms of increased policy space for, climate change and the entire transition that we need to ensure in a smooth, successful manner, so that we can actually deliver and reach the climate change targets, sustainably. Here, there are discussions on carbon credit, but we have to also ensure that they are steered in the right direction. We cannot have a carbon credit market which takes into account only the annual carbon emissions. They should take into account the historical carbon emissions as well. So that discussion is currently underway. But your point is well taken, sir, that we'll try to mainstream discussions in a manner that historical emissions are also accounted whenever there is any discussion on carbon credits. Similarly, we recently had in COP an agreement in principle on loss and damage. This came after 30 years of discussions. For the first time, loss and damage principle was accepted. So that is one thing we'll try to build upon further to ensure that the cumulative and historical carbon emissions are also deliberated upon when talking about carbon credits. Ma'am, your point about having G7 separately mentioning it in 2000, G20 actually came about only in 2008. In 1997, it started as a finance minister's discussion. So I will add a couple of, I'll add a couple of slides in my, this thing in what will be circulated. On renewables, yes, one sun, one grid, we have talked about transnational grid connectivity. In our, we had brought that in. This is something which is very important. India is already working in terms of transnational grid connectivity with its neighborhood, including the distant Sri Lanka, but in terms of the distance that is to be covered. But this is something, maybe a green grids initiative is something that we would, we can talk about in our presidency. So all the suggestions are very well taken. Thank you.
Like we can start from these South Asian countries, excluding Pakistan, if it is not interested at all. Because I was also part of the COP27, I went there in Egypt, and I also attended all these, so they just plan a South Asian group so that they can exchange, like we exchange our hydro energy with the Bhutan, in the same way with the Nepal, so in that way.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. The reference to transnational grid connectivity was there in Bali. We had supported it, and we will mainstream it more in our presidency. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, honorable members of parliament, for joining this session. On behalf of Parliamentary Research and Training Institute for Democracy, I would like to present a memento to sir. And I request everybody to join us for tea after this.